She walked into that courtroom with her head held high and pointed straight at the biggest man in the room. That man, Clara Whitmore said, her voice steady as iron, is the only honest soul in this entire town. The room went dead silent. Because 3 days ago she had refused to even speak his name. What changed? What did she see that no one else would allow themselves to see? If you're new here, subscribe, hit the bell, and drop your city in the comments. I want to know how far this story has traveled. The first time Clara Whitmore heard the name Caleb Stone, she was standing at the back of Henderson's General Store, trying to make $2 last the rest of the week. She wasn't eavesdropping. She didn't need to. In a town like Red Creek, Wyoming, conversations had a way of finding you whether you wanted them or not. "He came in again this morning," said Mrs. Dunlap, dropping her voice like she was reporting a crime. "Bought half the store, didn't say a word to anybody, just stood there big as a barn door staring at folks like he dared them to look back." "I heard he broke a man's arm last fall," said another woman. Clara didn't know her name, just for walking too close to his fence line. "My husband says he keeps to himself because he knows what he is," Mrs. Dunlap added. "A man that size living alone out there, he's not right. He can't be." Clara kept her eyes down, counting out her coins. She had learned over the last hard year that people in Red Creek loved a story more than they loved the truth. She wasn't interested in either one right now. She had bread to bake, rent to worry about, and exactly $14 standing between her and sleeping in the street. She didn't think about Caleb Stone again. Not that day. It was 3 weeks later when she saw him for the first time. She was carrying flour from the wagon to her small rented kitchen behind Main Street. 4 heavy bags stacked in her arms because she couldn't afford to make 2 trips, and she turned the corner and nearly walked directly into a wall. Except the wall breathed. She stumbled backward. The top bag slipped. She grabbed for it, missed, and 50 pounds of flour hit the mud with a sound like a cannon shot. She stood there, hands empty, staring up. The man in front of her was without question the largest human being she had ever seen in her life. 6'7", maybe taller. Shoulders that blocked out the afternoon light. He wore a plain work coat worn at the elbows and a hat that had seen better decades. His face was weathered and quiet, the kind of quiet that came from spending more time with horses than with people. He looked down at the ruined flour bag. Then he looked at her. "You hurt," he said. His voice was low. Not unfriendly, just careful, like a man who had learned to measure every word before he spent it. "No," Clara said. She was already kneeling, trying to salvage what she could, which was nothing. The bag had split clean. 50 pounds of flour was now a gray cloud, slowly dissolving into the mud. "I'm fine." He crouched down beside her. She flinched back without meaning to. It happened fast, instinct, not decision. And the moment she did it, she wished she hadn't. His face didn't change. Not exactly. But something behind his eyes shifted very slightly, like a door closing quietly in a house where everyone was already asleep. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a folded bill, and set it on top of the ruined bag. "That should cover the flour," he said. Clara looked at the bill. It was more than the flour cost. It was more than the flour and everything else in her kitchen combined. "I don't need your money," she said. "I know you don't need it," he said. "I'm offering it." He stood up, all of him, rising slowly to his full height, touched the brim of his hat, and walked away. She stared after him, the bill still sitting in the mud. It took her a long moment to decide. Then she picked it up. She told herself it was a loan. She told herself she'd pay it back. She told herself a lot of things that week. What she didn't tell herself, what she wasn't ready to admit, was that she kept thinking about the way his face had shifted when she flinched. The way that small, involuntary movement of hers had landed on him like something he had felt before. Many times before. She pushed the thought away. She had her own problems. But Red Creek was a small town, and small towns had a way of circling back. It was Harriet Cole who told her about the notice. Harriet ran the post office and considered it her personal duty to know everything that traveled through it, including things that were technically none of her business. "Caleb Stone put up a notice," Harriet said, leaning across the counter with the particular satisfaction of a woman delivering news she'd been holding all morning. Marriage notice. Posted it on the board outside the church. Clara was there to send a letter to her cousin in Denver. A letter asking carefully if there was any work available anywhere near him. She tried not to react. "Is that so?" she said. "Looking for a wife." Harriet continued, dropping her voice, as though the subject required discretion. "Says, and I'm reading this exactly as it was written. Mind you, says he doesn't care about beauty or money or social standing. Says he wants a partner, for the ranch, for the long winters." She paused meaningfully. "For life." Said Clara. "Everyone's having a good laugh about it, of course." Harriet lowered her voice further, which somehow made her louder. "Who would say yes to that man, who would willingly walk into a life out there with him?" Clara took her change and her receipt and said nothing. She read the notice herself that afternoon. She stood in front of the church board for longer than she intended to. The notice was written in a plain hand, no flourish, no decoration. Straight lines, straight words. "I am looking for a wife. Not for appearance or social position. I am looking for a woman who is willing to work hard, who is honest, and who wants a real partnership. Life on a cattle ranch is difficult. The winters are long. I will not pretend otherwise. But I offer respect, a real home, and a man who will never give up on what matters. If you are interested, send word to Stone Ranch North Road, 3 miles past the creek. Caleb Stone." She read it twice. Then she folded her hands, turned away, and walked back to her kitchen. No, she thought. Absolutely not. 2 days later, Clara's landlord raised her rent. Not by a little, by a third. Effective the 1st of next month. She sat down at her kitchen table and did the arithmetic 4 times, hoping the numbers would change. They didn't. She was already working 6 days a week, dawn to dusk, selling bread and pastries at the market. She had no room to increase her income. She had no savings to fall back on. She had no family in Red Creek, no one who owed her a favor, and no one in this town who was going to extend credit to a woman living alone with no husband and no property. She did the arithmetic one more time. The numbers still didn't change. She went back to the board outside the church. She stood there for a long time in the late afternoon cold, reading that notice again. Honest, hard-working, a real partnership, respect. She thought about Mrs. Dunlap's voice in the general store. "He's not right. He can't be." She thought about the flour in the mud. The bill placed carefully on top of the ruined bag. "I know you don't need it. I'm offering it." She thought about his face when she had flinched. "You're out of your mind," she said quietly to herself. Then she went home and wrote a letter. She rode out to Stone Ranch the next morning before she could talk herself out of it. The ride was 3 miles north, and every one of those miles gave her brain another opportunity to list all the reasons she was making a terrible mistake. By the time she reached the gate, she had accumulated 27 reasons. She counted them. She got off her horse anyway. The gate was plain iron, well-maintained, unlatched. She pushed it open and walked through. She expected she didn't know what she expected. Something grim. Something that matched the rumors. A place that felt dangerous or neglected or cold. What she found was a working ranch. Nothing more, nothing less. Fences in good repair. Grounds that were clean and organized. Equipment stacked neatly under a covered shelter. A barn that smelled like hay and horses. And from the barn, a voice. Low. Patient. Speaking very quietly, almost to itself. She stopped. She walked toward the open barn door and looked in. Caleb Stone was on one knee beside a young horse, both big hands moving slowly over the animal's left foreleg. The horse was trembling slightly, skittish, nervous, but not pulling away. Caleb's voice was a constant low murmur, words too soft to make out clearly. Just sound, just presence. The horse's head dipped. Its ears went soft. It stopped trembling. He didn't hear her come in. She stood there and watched for a moment longer than she meant to. Then she cleared her throat. He looked up. His expression didn't shift toward alarm or hostility, just settled the same quiet she'd seen before. Miss Whitmore, he said. Not a question. You know my name, she said. Small town, he said simply. He stood up slowly and turned to face her fully. You came. I haven't decided anything, she said immediately. I came to talk, to ask questions, that's all. Fair enough, he said. I'll answer what I can. He walked out of the stall, patted the horse once on the neck as he passed and gestured toward the entrance. There's coffee on, he said. If you want. They sat at the kitchen table. Not the living room. The kitchen table, plain wood, 2 chairs, a window that looked out over the north pasture. He poured coffee into 2 plain ceramic mugs and set one in front of her without asking how she took it. She took it black. So did he. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. She was cataloging him without meaning to. The hands around the mug, large enough to look almost absurd around the small ceramic, but held with a kind of careful steadiness. The line of his jaw. The way he sat, not expansively, not taking up space to make a point, but contained, deliberate, as though he had spent a long time learning to make himself seem smaller in rooms where he wasn't. You should know, she said, that I've heard everything they say about you in town. I expect you have, he said. I don't know how much of it is true. Not much, he said. But I understand why people believe it. I've stopped trying to correct it. Why? He turned the mug slowly in his hands. Because in my experience, when people have decided what you are arguing with them, just makes them more certain. He looked at her evenly. So I stopped arguing. That must be lonely, she said. Something moved in his face, not pain exactly, but recognition. Like she had named something he hadn't expected anyone to name. Yes, he said simply. It is. Mini climax number 1. Clara set down her mug. I need to be honest with you, she said. I'm not here because I read your notice and thought you sounded like a good man. I'm here because my landlord raised my rent and my numbers don't add up. She held his gaze. I'm here out of practicality, not romance. She expected him to be offended. Instead, something crossed his face that looked almost like relief. I appreciate that, he said. You do? Yes. He leaned back slightly. I've had 2 women come out here this week already. One of them cried before she got off her horse. The other one told me she'd always admired a man of unique stature. His jaw tightened faintly. I sent them both home. Clara stared at him. Why? Because I don't want someone who's come to perform bravery, he said. And I don't want someone who finds my size interesting. The word came out careful, precise, like he'd thought about exactly how to say it. I want someone who will talk to me like you're talking to me right now. Like I'm a person. Clara was quiet. You're still talking to me, he said. Most people stop before this point. She asked him about the ranch. He told her. Stone Ranch ran 1,200 head of cattle with 4 permanent ranch hands who came in during the busy season and reduced to 2 in the winter. The land had been his parents' left to him at 19 when his father died of fever, and his mother followed 2 months later. He had not inherited money. He had inherited debt, 60 acres of dying grassland, and a reputation for being the oversized, strange son of a struggling family. He had built the rest himself. 1,200 head, 3,000 acres. A cattle operation that turned a consistent profit, supplied 2 towns, and provided steady employment for 8 families. Clara listened to all of it. Why the notice? She asked. You clearly don't need a business partner. You're doing fine. He was quiet for a moment. I come home to an empty house every night, he said. I've done it for 14 years. He looked at his coffee mug. I'm 41 years old. At some point, a man has to admit that fine isn't the same as good. Mini climax number 2. Clara looked at him steadily. I have to tell you something, she said. About why I really left my last situation. Before Red Creek. He waited. Not pushing. Not filling the silence. I was engaged, she said. 2 years ago in Cheyenne. The man I was engaged to, he was well regarded, well liked. Everybody in town thought he was a fine, upstanding person. She paused. He wasn't. and when I ended it, he made sure everyone knew the ending of the story without knowing any of the beginning. By the time I left Cheyenne, most people thought I was the problem." Caleb said nothing for a moment. "What was his name?" he asked. "It doesn't matter." "No," he agreed. "I suppose it doesn't." He looked at her. "You're telling me because you want me to know there's a history, that there might be consequences, things that could follow you here." "Yes," she said. "All right," he said. She blinked. "That's all right. Everybody's got something following them," he said simply. "I'm not in a position to judge a person for that." She sat back. Outside, the wind came up across the north pasture. She could hear it moving through the grass. "I haven't said yes," she said. "I know," he said. "You came to ask questions. So do you have more questions?" She did. She stayed for 3 more hours. Mini climax, number 3. It was when she was leaving already on her horse, already turned toward the gate, that she heard it. A boy's voice, high and frightened. She turned back. Caleb was already moving faster than a man his size had any right to move toward the south fence line. She could see past the fence a small figure, maybe 9 or 10 years old, trapped under the bottom rail of a cattle pen, where one of the steers had spooked and was moving in tight, agitated circles. The boy was too scared to move. The steer was too close. Caleb didn't hesitate. He went over the fence like it wasn't there. One hand, one motion, dropped into the pen, put himself between the steer and the boy, and spread his arms wide. The steer stopped, stood rolling its eyes, confused by this enormous obstacle that had appeared from nowhere. "Get up," Caleb said to the boy, quiet and calm. "Nice and slow. Go through the bottom of the fence right behind you." The boy scrambled through. Caleb backed out after him, keeping his body between the boy and the animal the entire time. He turned around. The boy, who Clara could now see was the younger son of one of his ranch hands, was shaking from head to toe. Caleb put one hand very gently on top of his head. "You're all right," he said. "You're okay. Go find your daddy." The boy ran. Caleb looked up and found Clara still watching from the gate. His expression was completely unreadable. He wasn't performing anything. He hadn't done it for her to see. He had simply done it. She sat on her horse for a long moment. Then she rode home. She told herself she was still thinking about it. She told herself she hadn't decided. She told herself all the same things she'd been telling herself all week. That night, she sat at her kitchen table with a piece of paper and a pen, and she wrote 2 lists. The first list was every reason to say no. She wrote for 20 minutes. The second list was what she knew for certain about Caleb Stone. She wrote 3 things. He spoke to her like she was worth speaking to. I didn't pretend to be something he wasn't. And when a child was in danger, he moved toward it without thinking. She looked at both lists for a long time. Mini climax 4. The next morning, she went back to the board outside the church. Someone had written across the bottom of Caleb's notice in thick pencil letters, "Good luck finding any woman foolish enough." She stood there reading those words and felt something she hadn't expected. Anger. Not at Caleb. At the author. At the particular kind of cruelty that hid itself behind anonymity, that scratched its contempt across a man's honest words because it could, because there was no cost to it, because the people doing it would never be required to look him in the eye. She reached into her bag, found her own pencil, and very deliberately drew a clean line through the anonymous edition. A woman passing on the sidewalk stopped and stared at her. Clara looked at her steadily until the woman moved on. Then she turned and walked to the telegraph office. She sent a message to Stone Ranch. "I've made my decision. C. Whitmore." She gave herself 1 more day before she rode out again. She wanted to be sure. She sat with her decision through the full night, and in the morning she was still sure, and so she went. He was waiting on the porch when she arrived. Not anxiously, not pacing or fidgeting, just standing there, one shoulder against the post, a mug in his hand, like he had nowhere else to be. She dismounted and tied her horse. "I have conditions," she said. "All right," he said. 3 of them. He waited. "The first," she said, is that this is a real partnership. Not just the word. Not just on paper. I work, I contribute. I have a voice in what happens on this ranch. I'm not hired help with a wedding ring. Agreed, he said. No pause. The second is that if at any point either of us decides this isn't working, we talk about it, directly. Not through silence, not through distance. We talk. Agreed, he said again. The third, she said, and her voice shifted just slightly, is that you don't lie to me, about anything. Whatever is true, however hard it is, you tell me, and I'll do the same. He was quiet for a moment. That one, he said, is the one I've never been able to offer anyone before, because no one's ever asked for it. I'm asking. Then yes, he said. Agreed. She stood there looking up at him, still enormous, still entirely too large for any ordinary room, and she thought this might be the most surprising decision I've ever made. She put out her hand. He took it. His hand was twice the size of hers. He shook it with the same carefulness she had noticed about everything. He did not gently exactly, but controlled, deliberate. One more thing, she said. What's that? Stop letting people write things on your notice without saying anything. A beat. Something moved at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, not yet. I'll keep that in mind, he said. Mini Climax 5. The first Sunday after it was announced, Clara went to church alone. She had expected talk. She had not expected how direct it would be. She was barely through the door when Margaret Hale, who served on the church board and considered it a spiritual responsibility to weigh in on other people's lives, stepped directly into her path. Clara Whitmore, she said with the particular tone of a woman who believed she was being helpful. I hope you've thought carefully about what you're doing. I have, Clara said pleasantly, because there are things people know about that man. What things? Clara said. Not hostilely, just clearly. Specifically. Margaret blinked. She was not used to being asked to be specific. Well, he's people say. People say a lot of things, Clara said. I've noticed that. What do you know? What have you seen? Silence. That's what I thought, Clara said. She smiled warmly and without warmth. Excuse me, Margaret. She walked to her pew. She could feel the whole room watching her. She sat down, folded her hands, and looked straight ahead. Her heart was hammering. But she did not look back. The town had decided Clara Whitmore had lost her mind. They discussed it openly in the store, in the diner, on street corners. Some of them felt sorry for her. Some of them, the ones who had never liked her to begin with, felt vindicated as though her decision confirmed some suspicion they had always held about her judgment. None of them knew her. Not really. They knew the version of Clara that moved through their town, the quiet baker, the woman without family, the one who kept to herself. They had made their assessments based on what they could see from a distance, and they were quite satisfied with those assessments. It was she was beginning to realize exactly what they had done to Caleb. Mini Climax number 6. On a Wednesday, 2 weeks after their agreement, 3 weeks before the planned ceremony. Clara was delivering bread to the diner when she heard a conversation through the kitchen window. 2 men. She recognized one of the voices, Tom Harker, who ran the feed store, and someone she didn't know. Stone's got himself a woman finally, Tom said with a particular emphasis that made the word woman sound like something stuck to the bottom of a boot. Lord knows what he told her. What do you mean? I mean, Caleb Stone is not a man you want owing you anything, Tom said. My cousin worked out on that ranch 2 years back. Said Stone's got a temper that'll peel the paint off a wall when he's pushed. Clara stood very still outside the window. What happened? The other voice asked. Couple of the men were giving some of the new horses a hard time. You know how young cowboys get. Stone walked in and told them to stop. They didn't stop. Tom's voice lowered. He picked one of them up by the collar like a cat just picked him right up and carried him to the gate and set him outside it. Didn't raise his voice. Didn't hit anybody. But that ranch hand quit on the spot. Couldn't get away fast enough. Clara waited. She was expecting the twist, the escalation, the dark revelation she'd been half waiting for. The other man said, "Stone stopped them from harassing the horses." "Yeah. And he didn't actually hurt anybody." Tom paused. "No. Just the size of the man. It scared the life out of the kid." Clara walked away from the window. She thought about that very carefully. A man who stopped cruelty to animals, who used presence, not violence, who frightened someone but did not hurt them. She thought about the boy in the cattle pen, the gentleness of that one hand on top of his head. She thought about what people were calling a temper, and she thought about what it meant that that was the worst story Tom Harker had. Mini climax number 7. She told Caleb about it that evening. She told him because of condition 3. The one about honesty. He listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "Jack Dillard," he said. "That was the ranch hand's name. He was 17. He looked at his hands. "I should have spoken to him differently. He was young. He didn't know better." "You regret it," she said. "I regret that I scared him," he said. "I don't regret stopping what he was doing to those horses." He looked at her directly. "Is that a problem for you?" She considered. "No," she said. "But I want you to know that I heard it. And I'm telling you that I heard it, because that's what we agreed to." He held her gaze for a long moment. "You're the first person," he said slowly, "who's ever repeated a bad story about me to my face, and then waited to see what I had to say about it." "Was that wrong?" she asked. "No," he said. "That was—" He stopped, started again. "That was the most respectful thing anyone's done for me in a long time." Mini climax number 8. The last week before the wedding, Clara received a letter. It came with no return address. The postmark was Cheyenne. She opened it at the kitchen table alone very early in the morning. "You have made a terrible mistake. The man you're marrying is known in this territory for violence and instability. I am writing because I knew you once, and I cannot let you walk into danger without warning you. Come back to Cheyenne. There is still time. A friend." She read it twice. Then she set it on the table and sat with it for a long time. She knew the handwriting. It was not a friend. Mini climax number 9. She rode out to the ranch that afternoon. Caleb was in the north field checking fence line with one of his ranch hands. When he saw her riding fast, he came to meet her. She handed him the letter without preamble. He read it. His jaw tightened. Not in anger, in something she was coming to recognize in him, a kind of contained steadiness, the expression of a man who had learned to receive bad news without flinching. "Do you know who wrote it?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "Is it someone who could cause real trouble?" She thought about it. "Possibly." He folded the letter carefully and handed it back to her. "Then we should know what we're dealing with," he said. "Before the ceremony, not after." You don't want to ask me if any of what they wrote is true." He looked at her steadily. "I know what they wrote isn't true. I've told you who I am. You've told me who you are. A letter with no name on it isn't going to change what I know." She stared at him. "Clara," he said, and it was the first time he'd used her first name, just her name without miss or anything else. "I've spent my whole life being a rumor. I'm not going to help someone make you into one too. Whatever this is, we face it." She looked at the letter in her hand. "Together," she said. "That's what we agreed," he said. Mini climax number 10. The wedding was small by choice, not because they lacked guests, but because Clara had seen enough performance in her life to last it, and Caleb had never needed an audience. The Reverend. 2 witnesses. The small white church on the north end of Main Street on a cold Thursday morning in October. Clara wore her best dress, gray wool, not white, practical and clean, and carried nothing in her hands. Caleb wore the same plain jacket she had seen him in the first day, brushed clean, collar pressed. They stood before the Reverend, and the Reverend asked the standard words, and Clara heard herself saying yes, and she heard Caleb saying yes, and it was entirely possible that she had made the most reckless decision of her life. It was also entirely possible that she had made the truest one. When it was done, they walked out of the church together into the cold October air. Harriet from the post office was standing on the sidewalk across the street, not even pretending not to watch. Clara nodded to her. Harriet, startled into honesty, nodded back. Caleb looked down at Clara beside him. "All right," he said. She pulled her coat tighter against the cold. "Ask me in a year," she said. He thought about that. "Fair enough," he said. They walked back to the wagon together. The town of Red Creek watched them go. Not everyone who watched was laughing anymore. Not all of them, but some of them for the first time looked at Caleb Stone and didn't see a rumor. They saw a man, walking beside a woman who had chosen him not out of desperation, not out of pity, not out of ignorance, but with her eyes wide open after asking the hard questions and hearing the honest answers. That was Clara Whitmore had decided the closest thing to solid ground she had found in a very long time. She was going to build on it. Whatever came next, whatever was coming from Cheyenne, whatever rumor or ghost from the past, she was going to face it the same way she had faced the iron gate at Stone Ranch on that first cold morning. She was going to walk through it. The letter from Cheyenne sat in Clara's drawer for 4 days before she told Caleb she knew who wrote it. She hadn't been hiding it exactly. She'd been thinking. There was a difference, or at least she told herself there was, between hiding a thing and taking time to understand it before you spoke it out loud. Because the name attached to that letter was not just a name. It was a door she had spent 2 years keeping firmly shut and opening it again, even in conversation. Even to the one person she had promised, complete honesty required more preparation than she had expected. His name was Douglas Hale. Not Margaret Hale from the church. Though the shared surname was not a coincidence. Douglas was Margaret's nephew, which meant he had family in Red Creek, which meant the letter had not been sent blindly into the territory. Someone had told him where she was. Someone had given him her direction. And that fact alone told Clara something important. This was not a warning sent out of concern. This was a message sent to cause damage, carefully aimed, deliberately timed. She told Caleb on a Sunday evening, sitting at the kitchen table after supper, while the last of the daylight went gray outside the window. She told him all of it. Not just the letter. All of it. Douglas Hale, who had been charming and well-dressed and very good at being liked by the right people. Douglas Hale, who had proposed to her in front of her friends, and then 6 months later, when she discovered the truth about who he actually was. The debts he'd hidden the other woman in a town 20 miles east, the casual cruelty that only surfaced when no one else was watching, had stood in the center of Cheyenne society, and told everyone that Clara had broken off a good engagement because she was unstable, ungrateful, and difficult to live with. She watched Caleb's face while she talked. He did not interrupt. He did not shift or look away or do any of the things people did when they were uncomfortable with a story and wanted it to end. He just listened. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "He's in Red Creek," he said, not a question. "He has family here. I should have thought of it sooner. I knew Margaret's last name when I arrived, but there are plenty of Hales I didn't think. You had no reason to expect he'd follow you," Caleb said. "That's on him, not on you. He'll go to people here. He'll tell them things." "People here already believe the worst about me," Caleb said evenly. "So he's working with fertile ground." He turned the coffee mug slowly. "What does he want?" Clara looked at her hands. "I think he wants to watch something I've built fall apart. He's that kind of man. He doesn't necessarily want me back, he just doesn't want me to be all right." Caleb was quiet for another moment. "Then the best thing we can do," he said, "is be all right anyway." She looked at him. "That's your plan?" she said. "That's the beginning of one," he said. It was not, she thought, the most elaborate strategy she had ever heard. But there was something in the plainness of it that steadied her more than a complicated plan would have. They were all right. They were going to stay all right. And they were going to do it where everyone could see. She nodded once. "Okay," she said. He reached across the table and set his hand over hers briefly, not lingering, and then took it back and refilled both their mugs. That was how they left it. That night, Clara lay awake and thought about the fact that she had told the entire story, all of it. Everything she had spent 2 years carrying alone, and the man in the next room had not looked at her differently afterward. Not with pity. Not with reservation. Not with the slight recalculation she had seen on other people's faces when they heard difficult things. He had just listened. And then made a plan. She fell asleep before midnight for the first time in weeks. The next morning, the real work began. Not with Douglas Hale. Not yet. The work that began was quieter, more immediate, and in some ways harder, the work of two people who had agreed to share a life learning day by day what that actually meant. Clara had been on the ranch for 3 weeks as a married woman, and she had already discovered a number of things that the notice on the church board had not mentioned. She had discovered that Caleb woke at 4:30 in the morning, regardless of weather or season, moved through the kitchen without lighting a lamp, and was out the door before she was fully awake. She had discovered that he ate whatever was in front of him without comment, not indifferently, but with the focused efficiency of a man for whom food was fuel and gratitude was implied. She had discovered that he was constitutionally incapable of asking for help, not out of pride exactly, but out of a 41-year habit of doing everything alone. That last one required immediate correction. "Caleb," she said on the 4th morning, handing him his coffee as he came back in from the barn at noon. Muddy to the knee and favoring his left side in a way she had decided she was not going to ignore. "What happened to your side?" "Nothing," he said. "You've been moving wrong since this morning." "I'm fine." "That's not what I asked." He stopped, looked at her. Something behind his eyes shifted, the same quiet recalibration she had seen before, the recognition that she was not going to accept a non-answer, not today, not as a habit. "One of the fence posts came down in the night," he said slowly. "I was resetting it, and the wire snapped back, caught me in the ribs." "Let me see." "Clara." "Caleb." She kept her voice level. "Condition 2. We talk. That includes you telling me when you're injured." A pause. "Condition 2 was about the relationship," he said, "not about fence wire. If you crack a rib and can't work for 3 weeks, that affects the relationship," she said. "So yes, let me see." He looked at her for a long moment with the expression of a man encountering a situation for which his previous life had provided absolutely no preparation. Then he sat down at the kitchen table and lifted his shirt. She looked. She pressed carefully, watching his face. "Not broken," she said finally. "Probably bruised. You need to wrap it and not, Caleb, look at me, not do anything requiring you to twist at the waist for at least a week." "That's not possible," he said. "Make it possible," she said. "There are things that need—" "Then show me how to do them," she said. He stared at her. "The things that need doing," she said patiently. "Show me. I told you I was a partner, not a housemaid. Show me what needs doing, and I'll do it." Another long pause. "You've never worked cattle," he said. "I've never done a lot of things I've figured out," she said. "Show me anyway." That was the week Clara Whitmore learned how to stretch fence wire, identify the early signs of respiratory illness in cattle, and ride a working horse. At the pace a working horse actually moved, which was nothing like the gentle trot she had managed in town. She fell off once. She did not tell Caleb. She got back on. She also learned something that surprised her. Caleb was a patient teacher. Not warm exactly, not effusive, but precise and consistent. And when she made a mistake, he explained what had gone wrong without making her feel foolish for making it. He simply showed her again, and then again if necessary. "You're better at teaching than you think," she told him one evening. He considered this. "I've taught horses," he said. She laughed. It startled him, the laugh, the sudden brightness of it in the quiet kitchen. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. I don't hear that very often, in this house." She thought about that. "Well," she said, "you're going to start hearing it more." That evening, for the first time, she saw him smile. A real one, small and careful, like something he wasn't entirely sure was allowed. Like a man testing weight on ice he didn't trust. It lasted about 3 seconds before he picked up his coffee and looked at the window. But she'd seen it, and she stored it somewhere she intended to return to. Then came the Wednesday that changed everything. It was market day, which meant Clara rode into Red Creek to sell bread at the morning market, a habit she had kept up even after the wedding, partly because the income mattered, and partly because she refused to let the town think she had disappeared into Stone Ranch like a woman swallowed whole. She set up her table. She sold bread. She smiled at the people who smiled back and did not chase the ones who didn't. It was during the third hour that she heard the voice behind her. Clara. She knew it before she turned. Douglas Hale had a particular voice, smooth and practiced, the voice of a man who had spent years cultivating the impression of reasonableness. She had spent 6 months listening to it, and then spent 2 years trying to forget the specific way it could make a lie sound like concern. She turned. He looked the same. That was the first thing she noticed. Same good coat, same easy posture, same expression of warm and entirely manufactured friendliness. Slightly thinner, maybe. Slightly tired around the eyes. But the same. "Douglas," she said. Her voice came out flat and clean, which surprised even her. "You look well," he said. "I am well," she said. "I heard about the marriage." His expression shifted into something that was performing sadness very convincingly. "I was worried. I felt I had to reach out." "You reached out," she said. "Anonymously, by post." A brief flicker across his face. "I wasn't sure you'd read a letter with my name on it." "That's because you knew I'd recognize what it actually was," she said. "Which is not concern, it's interference." He took a half step forward, lowering his voice to the register that used to mean, "Let's be reasonable together," which had historically been a precursor to her capitulating to something she didn't agree with. She was aware of this now in a way she hadn't been at 24. "Clara," he said, "this man, the things people say about him, are largely untrue," she said, "as I imagine you've discovered if you've looked into them carefully, which I expect you have." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm here because I care about what happens to you," he said. "No," she said simply. "You're not." "Clara." "You're here," she said, keeping her voice level and very clear. "Because 2 years ago I walked away from something that you wanted to control, and you have never forgiven me for it. Not because you loved me, because you don't like to lose." She looked at him steadily. "I know you better than you'd like, Douglas. I've had time to understand what I was looking at." His expression did something complicated. "You've changed," he said. "I have," she agreed. "Is that his doing?" She looked at him for a moment without answering. Then she said, "I need you to hear what I'm saying to you right now clearly, so that we don't need to have this conversation again. I am married to Caleb Stone. I chose it. Nobody forced me. Nobody fooled me. I made a decision with my eyes open, and I stand behind it." She folded her hands on top of the bread table. "If you go around this town telling stories about me or about my husband, I will correct every single one of them, publicly, with specifics, including things I know about you that you would prefer remain private." She paused. "We understand each other." He stared at her. "You would do that," he said slowly. Not a question. He was recalibrating, she could see it happening, the reassessment of who he was dealing with. He had come expecting the Clara he remembered, careful, conflict-averse, easily made to doubt herself. She was not that person anymore. She wasn't entirely sure she had ever been, but she was absolutely certain she wasn't now. "Without hesitation," she said pleasantly. "Have a safe ride home, Douglas." She turned back to her bread table. After a moment, she heard his footsteps move away. She stood at her table for a full minute, both hands pressed flat against the wood, breathing steadily before the trembling in her knees subsided. A woman at the next table over, she sold preserves, and Clara had never spoken more than 2 words to her, leaned across and said quietly, "Well done, honey." Clara looked at her. "Thank you," she said. She rode home that afternoon and told Caleb everything. He listened the same way he always listened, completely, without interrupting, with his full attention and no performance of reaction. When she finished, he said, "You handled it." "I did," she said. "You didn't need me there," he said. "No," she said. "But I'm telling you because I said I would." She looked at him. And because I want you to know that he's going to be a problem. He won't stop because I asked him to. Men like Douglas don't stop." "I know," Caleb said. "So what do we do?" He thought for a moment. "We do the same thing we've been doing," he said. "We get up in the morning, we work, we treat people well. We build something he can't knock over." He looked at her. "A reputation is the most durable thing a person can have. It's harder to destroy than a building, harder to attack than a person." He paused. "That's what we build." She thought about that. "That's a slow strategy," she said. "Yes," he said. "But we have time." She wasn't entirely sure they did. But she trusted his read more than she trusted her own anxiety, and so she let it settle. That was the last week of October. In November, the first real test arrived. It came not from Douglas Hale, not directly, but from a direction Clara hadn't anticipated. It came from inside the ranch. Pete Halford was Caleb's longest-serving ranch hand. He had worked at Stone Ranch for 11 years, which meant he had been there before the operation grew, before the cattle increased, before the success that had become the ranch's reputation. He was 53 years old, bow-legged, and possessed of a certainty about how things should be done that had calcified over his decade of employment into something close to absolute. He did not approve of Clara. I didn't say so directly. He was too careful for that. But it showed in the way he spoke to Caleb when Clara was in earshot, conspicuously addressing only Caleb as though she were furniture. It showed in the way he would volunteer information she needed and then deliver it 2 steps to the left of her aimed at Caleb's shoulder. It showed in 1,000 small exclusions that were individually deniable and collectively unmistakable. Clara noticed. She said nothing. She watched. Caleb noticed too. She could tell by the way his jaw set when it happened, a particular tightening, brief and controlled. But he didn't say anything either. Not at first. She understood that he was thinking the same way she was thinking, deciding where the right place to intervene was. The right place turned out to be a Thursday morning. She had been out to the barn at 5:30 earlier than Caleb, which she had made a habit of because she liked the quiet of those early hours, and had discovered she was actually useful in the barn, more useful than she'd expected, and she was checking on the 2 foals they'd moved into the smaller stall when she heard Pete come in and stop short when he saw her there. "Didn't expect you," he said. "I'm here most mornings," she said evenly. "Caleb usually handles the foals." "I know," she said. "I've been learning how." Pete was quiet for a moment. Then, in a voice that was just barely within the range of acceptable, "Ranch work's different from kitchen work." Clara stood up from beside the smaller foal and turned to face him fully. "Pete," she said, "I've been here 6 weeks. In that time I've helped reset 3 sections of fence assisted at 2 calvings, managed the supply inventory, restructured the feed schedule to reduce cost by 12%, and handled all of the correspondence with the buyers in Laramie." She kept her voice completely level. "I am not here to decorate. And I'm not going to spend the next year proving that to you, one conversation at a time. So let me say it plainly now. I am a partner on this ranch. Not a visitor. Not a problem to be managed. If you have concerns about decisions being made here, you bring them to me and Caleb together. Can we agree on that?" Pete looked at her for a long moment. He was a man who had seen a lot and said little, which meant that when he was quiet, it was impossible to know exactly what was happening behind his eyes. She held his gaze and waited. 12%, he said finally. "On the feed budget," she said. "Yes." He grunted. It was not agreement exactly, but it was not argument either. He moved past her into the barn and went about his work. That evening, Caleb found out about it from Pete, who had apparently recounted the conversation to Caleb with a combination of lingering grievance and reluctant respect that had resulted in an account almost entirely accurate. "Pete came to me," Caleb said. "I figured he might," Clara said. "He said you talked to him straight." "I did." He said, and I'm repeating this exactly, "that you reminded him of his wife." Caleb paused. "His wife is a woman he's described to me on multiple occasions as the most formidable person he's ever encountered." Clara considered this. "Is that a compliment or a warning?" "With Pete," Caleb said, "it's both." She laughed. He almost smiled. They were learning. She realized how to be in the same space, how to read each other, how to share silence, how to disagree and come back to the table. It was not the lightning strike intimacy of stories she had heard as a girl. It was slower than that and more durable. It felt like building something rather than discovering something which suited her better, because she had always trusted what was built over what was simply found. There was the evening about 5 weeks in, when she caught him sitting at the kitchen table after she'd gone to bed. She had come back for water and seen the lamplight under the door with a book open in front of him and his lips moving very slightly over the words. And she had stopped in the doorway and understood suddenly that Caleb Stone, who managed thousands of acres and hundreds of animals, and all of the financial complexity of a significant cattle operation, had taught himself to read as an adult. Not well at first, but stubbornly. Word by word with the same deliberateness he brought to everything else. She said nothing. She got her water and went back to bed. The next morning she put 2 more books on the table without comment. When she came in from the barn at noon, both of them were slightly moved. She noticed the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. Not gratitude exactly, or not only that. Something more complicated. The look of a person who has spent so long being misread that being read correctly is almost alarming. She looked back at him and said, "The bread's almost done." And he said, "Smells good." And that was all. But the look stayed with her. The second week of November brought cold that settled in hard and didn't move. The kind of cold the territory was famous for, that froze the water in the troughs overnight and turned every routine task into something requiring twice the time and 3 times the effort. And it brought something else. A man arrived at the ranch gate on a Wednesday morning asking for Caleb. Clara answered because Caleb was out in the north pasture checking on a section of fence the previous night's wind had damaged. The man's name was Walt Greer. He was a neighboring rancher, ran about 400 head on a smaller operation 2 miles east. He was red-faced from the cold and not entirely happy about it. "I need to speak to Stone," he said. "He's in the north field," Clara said. "What's the matter?" Greer hesitated. Men like Greer often hesitated when Clara spoke first, recalibrating, deciding whether to route around her to the man or engage with the reality in front of them. He chose reality. "3 of his steers are in my east pasture," he said. "Fence must have gone down in the night. I don't want trouble, but I need them moved." "Of course," Clara said immediately. "I'll get Caleb, and we'll send men over this afternoon." "Today," Greer said, sounding slightly surprised. "Today," she said. "You shouldn't have cattle that aren't yours sitting in your pasture eating your feed. I'll make sure it's handled by 3. He blinked. "Right," he said. It was handled by 2:30. Caleb rode over with 2 of the hands, retrieved the steers, and while he was there assessed the shared fence line with Greer and outlined a plan for reinforcing the whole section before the real winter hit. Greer, when he came to settle the conversation, said to Clara, "Your wife sorted that before I could finish explaining it." Caleb looked at her. She was already going back inside. "I've noticed," Caleb said. What came next was the moment that Clara had not prepared for. It arrived without announcement on a Friday afternoon in the 3rd week of November, while she was in the kitchen and Caleb was at the table going over the accounts. A knock at the door. Clara opened it. Standing on the porch was a woman she had never seen before. Maybe 45, thin-boned and well-dressed, in a way that suggested she'd traveled to be here, not just ridden over from town. Dark eyes. Careful expression. The particular stillness of a person who has rehearsed what they're about to say many times and is now deciding whether to say it. "I'm looking for Caleb Stone," the woman said. Clara looked at her. "I'm his wife," she said. "Who are you?" The woman's composure held, but something shifted in it. "My name is Eleanor Marsh," she said. "I knew Caleb, a long time ago." Behind Clara, a chair pushed back. Caleb had heard the voice. He appeared in the doorway, and when he saw Eleanor Marsh, something happened to his face that Clara had never seen before. Not fear, not anger. Something older than either of those. The expression of a man coming face to face with a moment he had buried so completely he'd almost convinced himself it was gone. "Eleanor," he said. "Caleb," she said. Clara stood in the middle of the doorway and felt the weight of a history she knew nothing about pressing in from both sides. "You should come in," she said, because it was cold, and because she was not a woman who let important things happen outside the door where she couldn't see them clearly. Eleanor Marsh came inside. The three of them sat at the kitchen table, and Eleanor Marsh, after a long moment of looking at her own hands, said, "I came because I owe you something, Caleb. I came because I heard you'd found someone, and I thought if I'm ever going to say this, it's now or never." She looked up. "I'm the one who turned you down in front of everyone. In Dalton 12 years ago. I'm the one who made it into something public when it didn't have to be. And I have thought about that for 12 years, and I'm ashamed of it, and I needed you to know that." Caleb said nothing. "You didn't deserve that," Eleanor said. "You deserved what you deserved was a quiet answer, yes or no privately like a human being. Instead I was—" She stopped. "I was afraid of what people would say, and so I let them say things about you instead, and I have never forgiven myself for it." The kitchen was very quiet. Clara looked at Caleb, who was looking at the table. His hands were flat on the wood, very still. She could see what it was costing him not to break exactly, but to hold. To sit with something that had been a weight for 12 years and feel it acknowledged by the person who had set it there. "Caleb," Clara said softly. He looked at her. She held his gaze and said nothing, because she had was learning that sometimes what he needed was not words, but the fact of her presence. The confirmation that he was not alone in the room. He looked back at Eleanor. "I appreciate you coming," he said. His voice was even, rough at the edges. "It took something to do that." "It was overdue," Eleanor said. "Maybe," he said. "But most people don't do overdue things, so I appreciate it." Eleanor nodded. She stood. She was already pulling on her coat. At the door she turned and looked at Clara. "He was always a good man," she said. "I just didn't have the courage to say so when it mattered." She left. Clara closed the door. She came back to the kitchen and sat down across from Caleb. She did not ask him how he felt because she could see how he felt, and what she saw was a man quietly dismantling a wall he had built 12 years ago, piece by piece, in the middle of his own kitchen, while trying to appear as though nothing unusual was happening. "You okay?" she said. "I'm fine," he said. "Caleb." He looked at the table, then at her, then at the table again. "I built a lot of myself on the assumption that nobody was coming," he said quietly. "That this," he gestured at the kitchen. "The window, the ranch outside, was going to be the whole of it. Just the work, just the land." He paused. "It's strange when the thing you'd stopped expecting starts to actually exist." Clara was quiet. "Does it still feel strange?" she said. He looked at her directly. "Every morning," he said. "But less." She nodded once. "Good," she said. She got up and put the kettle on. Behind her, she heard him exhale long and slow and very quiet, like a man setting something down he'd been carrying for a long time. She kept her back to him for a moment, giving him that. Then she said, "I'm putting biscuits on. You want 2 or 3? A pause. "3, he said. She smiled at the stove. Outside, the November cold pressed against the windows of Stone Ranch. Inside, something that had been slowly, carefully becoming real continued to become more real, the way things did when two people stopped pretending and simply chose each other day by day, in the small and ordinary moments that nobody wrote songs about, but everyone who had ever truly loved someone knew were the ones that counted most. Douglas Hale was still in Red Creek. She had not forgotten. There were things still coming. Feel them gathering at the edge of everything, the way a storm gathered at the edge of the territory, invisible until it wasn't. But tonight, there were biscuits, and the kettle was hot, and the man at her kitchen table was setting down a 12-year wait. That was enough for tonight. She was going to let it be enough. Douglas Hale made his first real move on a Monday morning, 11 days after Eleanor Marsh rode away from Stone Ranch, and left something quieter and lighter in her wake. Clara found out the way she found out most things in Red Creek, not directly, not from the person it concerned, but sideways through the particular social machinery of a small town that processed information the way a mill processed grain, constantly loudly, and with considerable loss of the original material. It was Harriet from the post office who told her, and Harriet, to her credit, looked genuinely uncomfortable about it. "I thought you should know," Harriet said, leaning across the counter and dropping her voice to the register she reserved for things that were both important and potentially dangerous. Douglas Hale had supper at the Granger Hotel last night with Mayor Aldous and two of the men from the Cattlemen's Association. She paused. He was there for 2 hours. Clara kept her face very still. "Do you know what they talked about?" "Not exactly," Harriet said. "But I know that Jim Aldous came into the post office this morning and asked me whether there had been any. His word was complaints about Stone Ranch, about Caleb specifically." "And had there been?" "No," Harriet said firmly. "I told him so. But Clara—" She hesitated. Aldous looked like a man who'd already been handed the answer he wanted and was just going through the motions of asking the question. Clara thanked her, bought her stamps, and walked out. She sat on her horse outside the post office for a full minute before she let herself feel the weight of what Harriet had just told her. Douglas had not come to Red Creek simply to rattle her. He had come with a strategy. He was building something slowly, carefully, the way he always built things, with dinners and handshakes and conversations that could be denied later. She rode back to the ranch at a pace that was slightly faster than strictly necessary. Caleb was in the south barn when she arrived. She told him everything while he worked, watching her hands because she needed something to do with them. When she finished, he set down the tool he was holding. "The Cattlemen's Association," he said. "That's what she said. Aldous has been trying to consolidate the Northern Range leases for 2 years, Caleb said. If he can find cause to challenge my standing with the association, he gets first position on the lease renewal in spring." His voice was flat, factual. But she had learned to read the space between his words. Hale gave him a reason to move. "What reason?" Caleb looked at her steadily. "Me. My reputation. Whatever version of it Hale has been packaging for people who want an excuse to use it." He paused. "This isn't just personal anymore. This is about the ranch." She had known this somewhere in the back of her mind, but hearing him say it plainly made it solid in a way it hadn't been before. Douglas Hale had found the pressure point. Not Clara, not their marriage. The ranch itself, the thing Caleb had built from nothing, the thing that was his foundation, the proof of 14 years of unwitnessed work. "What do we do?" she said. "We go to the meeting," Caleb said. "What meeting?" "The one they're going to call," he said. "They'll make it formal. They have to if they want it to mean anything. They'll call an association meeting, present whatever Hale has given them, and ask for a response." He looked at her. "When they do, we go, and we answer. And if they've already decided, then we make it harder for them to pretend they have," he said. She looked at him. There was something different in his expression, not anger, not fear, but a kind of focused resolve, the look of a man who has spent years absorbing the world's opinion of him and has finally, at this specific moment, decided he is done absorbing. "Caleb," she said slowly, "how bad could this actually get?" He was quiet for a moment. "If they revoke my association standing, I lose access to the northern leases," he said. "That's about 400 head of cattle I can't graze through spring. I'd have to sell early at winter prices." He paused. "I'd survive it, but it would set us back 2 years. 2 years. She let that sit. "All right," she said. "Then we go to the meeting." The meeting was called 4 days later. Those 4 days were the strangest Clara had experienced since arriving at Stone Ranch, because they were entirely ordinary on the surface and entirely not ordinary underneath. Caleb worked his regular hours. She worked hers. They ate supper together, talked about feed costs and the 2 heifers that were close to term, and the roof section on the equipment shed that needed attention before the next heavy snow. But at night, lying awake in the particular dark of a ranch house miles from town, Clara ran through what she knew about Douglas Hale the way you ran your tongue over a sore tooth. Cataloging, mapping, trying to anticipate. Douglas was not a stupid man. That had always been his most dangerous quality. He was charming and patient, and he understood that the most effective damage was the kind that looked from a distance like concern. She knew what he would present. He would present the rumors, the stories people had told for years, the exaggerations, the incidents that were real but stripped of context. The version of Caleb Stone that Red Creek had built out of fear and distance, and the very human tendency to make a story out of what you didn't understand. What she didn't know yet was what she was going to do about it. On the third night, she sat at the kitchen table after Caleb had gone to sleep, and she wrote 2 pages of notes. Not a speech, not an argument, just truth. Everything she had seen, everything she knew. Written out in her plain, even hand on plain white paper, the way she had always processed things that mattered by writing them down until they were clear. She read it back. Then she folded it, put it in her pocket, and went to bed. The meeting was held at the Granger Hotel in the large back room they used for civic occasions. Clara knew before they walked in that the room would be arranged in a particular way. The association men at the front. The audience behind, the clear implication of a trial dressed up as a discussion. She was right. Caleb walked in first, because he always walked in first. Anywhere, not from pride, but from the physical reality of his size, which meant that his entry into any room required the room to adjust before anyone else could follow. Clara came in directly behind him, and she watched the adjustment happen, the shift in posture, the repositioning of expressions, the particular silence that fell when Caleb Stone entered a space. She had spent nearly 4 months watching this happen, and she still found it remarkable the way a room's entire atmosphere could change based on one person's presence. And she found it remarkable in a different way now than she would have in the beginning, because now she knew what was underneath it. The patience, the gentleness. The man who read slowly by lamplight and put an extra hand of hay out for the horses every night without being asked. And so watching people flinch from him had stopped feeling like understandable caution and started feeling like a specific kind of injustice. Mayor Aldous opened the meeting with a politician's careful preamble about community standards and the importance of maintaining trust within the association. Clara watched him and thought, you rehearsed that. You rehearsed it with someone who coached you. Douglas Hale was seated to the right of the mayor. He looked at Clara when she came in and gave her a small, regretful nod, the performance of a man who was here reluctantly doing what had to be done. She did not nod back. The presentation was, as she had anticipated, a collection of the worst stories Red Creek had ever told about Caleb Stone. The fence line incident stripped of the context that the man crossing it had been attempting to run stolen cattle through. The confrontation at the feed store with no mention of the fact that the man Caleb had argued with had been underpaying his workers for 2 seasons, and Caleb had known it. The words, violent, unstable, unpredictable, and not a man. You want holding a position of trust within this community were all deployed with the smoothness of careful preparation. Clara sat beside Caleb and kept her face entirely still and counted to 10 inside her head. Caleb's face was the same controlled quiet she had come to know well. He was listening. Actually listening, not performing patience, but genuinely attending to every word the way a man did when he intended to respond to the substance rather than the feeling. When Aldous finished, he asked if Caleb had anything to say. Caleb stood. The room did its adjusting thing again. He let it. Yes, he said. I have a few things to say. He addressed every incident directly in the order it had been presented. No anger, no defensiveness. Simply the other half of each story offered plainly with names and dates and outcomes. Some of those outcomes were known to people in the room. Some were not. When he got to the fence line incident, a man in the 3rd row, one of the smaller ranchers, whose name Clara had learned was Gus. Mercer shifted in his seat and said under his breath, but loud enough to be heard, "That's the Delacroix situation. I know that story." Stone was right. Aldous shot a look at Mercer. Mercer looked back unimpressed. Caleb continued. He spoke for 7 minutes. Clara had timed it because she knew that 7 minutes was long enough to say everything necessary, and short enough that no one could accuse him of grandstanding. She had not told him that. He had calibrated it himself. When he sat down, the room was different from when he'd stood up. Not transformed, not won over, but cracked open slightly the way a room cracked when it heard something true, after being full of something not quite true for too long. Then Douglas Hale spoke. He did it smoothly. He acknowledged Caleb's account with the specific generosity of a man who doesn't believe a word of it, but wants to appear open-minded. He talked about community safety, about the responsibility of association members, about his deep and genuine concern for Clara's well-being. He turned once to look at her with an expression so precisely calibrated to compassionate worry that she almost admired the craftsmanship. "I think we all want to believe the best," Douglas said. "But the pattern of behavior taken together suggests something that cannot simply be explained away. A community has an obligation to its members, particularly to those who may not be in a position to see a situation clearly." He paused, let that sit, then added, "No offense intended to Mrs. Stone." The room was very quiet. Clara stood up. She had not planned to stand. She had planned to stay seated and let Caleb's 7 minutes do what 7 minutes of truth could do. But Douglas had just deployed the one tactic she had not fully anticipated, the implication that she was a victim too uninformed to know it. That her presence here, her marriage, her choice, was not a decision, but a circumstance. She was not going to let that sit in this room unchallenged. "I'd like to respond to that," she said. Aldous looked startled. "Mrs. Stone, this isn't really—" "Mr. Aldous," she said pleasantly. "If Mr. Hale is permitted to speak about my well-being, I think it's reasonable to allow me to speak about it as well. I'll be brief." A beat. Aldous conceded with a nod. She looked at Douglas. She pulled the folded paper from her pocket, opened it, and set it on the table in front of her. She didn't read from it. She had written it to clarify her own thinking, not to use as a script. But the act of putting it on the table, visible, documented, substantive, was its own statement. "I am going to tell you what I know," she said. "Not what I've heard, not what I've been told, what I have personally witnessed since the day I arrived at Stone Ranch." She told them about the boy in the cattle pen. The ranch hand, Pete Halford, who had worked for Caleb for 11 years and whose 3 children had never missed a meal, in part because Caleb Stone paid a fair wage and never docked it without cause. The family 2 miles north, whose fence had failed in September, and whose cattle would have scattered across the territory if Caleb had not ridden out with 3 of his men and spent a full day helping repair it without being asked, without sending a bill. The feed donation to the Coulter family after their barn burned, given anonymously, she had found the receipt in the ranch accounts, entered in Caleb's own careful hand, under community expense, with no name attached, the way all of his anonymous donations were entered. "Mr. Hale is very concerned about patterns," she said. "So am I. The pattern I have seen is a man who has spent 14 years building something, treating people fairly, and supporting this community without asking for recognition." She looked around the room. "The pattern Mr. Hale is presenting is a collection of second-hand stories assembled to serve a specific purpose, which is not community safety." She looked at Douglas directly. "It's a land lease." The room shifted again. Douglas's expression did something that was almost too fast to catch a flicker of something real beneath the performance there and gone like a match struck in a wind. "I have nothing to gain from Mr. Stone's association standing," Douglas said smoothly. "You don't," Clara agreed. "But Mayor Aldous does, and you are his guest." She looked at Aldous. "The northern lease renewals are in March, I believe." Aldous said nothing. "I thought so," Clara said. She sat down. The room was very, very quiet. Caleb looked at her. Not with surprise exactly, she had learned that very little surprised him, but with an expression she had not seen before. Something open and unguarded. Something that took her a moment to identify. It was the face of a man who had never had anyone fight for him before, not defend him from a distance, not speak well of him in his absence, but stand up in a public room with his name attached to hers and say, "I see this man. I know this man. And I am telling you what I know." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked back at the front of the room. Gus Mercer spoke next, and then 2 other ranchers, and what they said pulled the meeting from the direction Aldous and Douglas had aimed it and into something more complicated and honest. Caleb's account of the fence line incident was corroborated. The feed donation was confirmed by a woman in the 4th row whose husband was Tom Coulter, and who had apparently suspected for months who the anonymous donor had been. The association did not move to revoke anything. Aldous closed the meeting with the careful vagueness of a man preserving his own future options, and people moved toward the door in the particular way they moved after a public gathering that had not gone the way the organizers intended. Clara walked out with Caleb. Outside in the cold, she heard Douglas's voice behind her. "Clara." She stopped. Caleb stopped beside her. Douglas approached. He looked different from a few feet away than he did across a room, smaller somehow. Less smooth. Like the performance required distance to work properly. "That was well done," he said. She said nothing. "But this isn't finished," he said. His voice had lost most of the warmth. What was underneath it was quieter and harder and more honest than anything he'd said inside. "You know that." "I know you believe that," she said. He looked at Caleb. Caleb looked back at him, just looked steady and entirely still, not threatening, not performing calm, but simply being it, the way a mountain was calm. Douglas looked away first. "You should understand something," Douglas said to Clara, and now his voice had shifted to something almost genuine, which made it paradoxically more unsettling. "I didn't come here just to cause trouble. I came because I know things about what's coming for you, for this ranch, things that have nothing to do with me." He paused. "There are people with history here, Clara, older than me, older than your marriage, and they're not going to let this go the way Aldous is letting it go." She kept her face still. "What people?" she said. "You'll find out," he said. "I wanted you to hear it from me first, so you'd know it wasn't me." He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he walked to his horse and rode away. She stood in the cold and did not move until the sound of his horse was gone. "He's telling the truth," she said quietly. Caleb was quiet beside her. "I know," he said. She turned to look at him. "You know something about what he meant." He exhaled, long and slow. "There's something I haven't told you," he said. "I've been trying to decide how." She looked at him steadily. "Condition 3, she said. "Yes," he said. "I know." He turned to face her fully in the cold. "There's a man named Garrett Holt. He owned the eastern edge of this land before my father bought it. My father bought it legally. I have the papers. I've always had the papers. But Garrett Holt has always believed the sale was forced, that my father took advantage of his family during a bad season." "Did he?" "No," Caleb said. "But Holt has spent 30 years believing he did, and Holt's son Franklin has spent 30 years inheriting that belief." He paused. "Franklin Holt was at that meeting tonight, in the back row. You wouldn't have known to look for him." She thought back through the room. "The man by the far door," she said. "Gray coat." "Yes." "And you didn't tell me," she said. "I thought Hale was the problem," he said. "I didn't think Franklin would move this quickly. I didn't think—" He stopped. "I should have told you. I'm sorry." She looked at him for a long moment. The cold was settling into her coat, and she barely felt it. "Is the title clear?" she said. "Legally, completely." "Yes," he said. "Completely. I've had it reviewed twice." "Then they can't take the land," she said. "No," he said. "But they can make every other thing difficult. The leases, the water rights on the Eastern Creek, the association relationships." He paused. "They can make it exhausting." She pulled her coat tighter. "Then we'd better not get tired," she said. He looked at her. She was already turning toward their horses. "Clara," he said. She stopped. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner," he said. I'm not used to—" He paused. "I'm not used to having someone to tell things to. I kept handling it the way I've always handled it, alone." She turned back. "I know," she said. "I'm not angry." She held his gaze. "But Caleb, I am your partner. Not just when it's convenient or when you've already solved it. When it's unsolved. When it's frightening. Especially then." He nodded slowly. "Especially then," he repeated, like he was storing it somewhere permanent. They rode home through the dark, and the cold had teeth now, and the wind was picking up from the north with the particular intent that meant weather coming. Neither of them spoke for the first mile. Then Caleb said, "The Coulter donation. You found it in the accounts." "Yes," she said. "How long have you known?" "6 weeks," she said. "You didn't say anything." "It wasn't mine to say," she said. "It was yours." I was quiet. "How many others did you find?" he said. She looked straight ahead at the dark road. 11, she said. "In the last 3 years alone." The wind moved between them. "Caleb," she said quietly, "the people in that town who fear you, they have no idea who they're afraid of." He said nothing for a long moment. Then very quietly, "You do." "Yes," she said. "I do." They rode the rest of the way home, in a silence that was not empty, but full of the particular weight of two people who have said what matters and don't need to fill the space afterward. The ranch house came into view. And light was on in the barn, because Pete had stayed late with one of the heifers, who had been restless all day, and was almost certainly going to deliver before morning. Inside, the kettle would be cold, and the kitchen would be dark, and there were accounts on the table, and hay in the barn, and a wind coming hard from the north that was going to make tomorrow difficult before it even started. Franklin Holt was out there somewhere in the dark, with a 30-year grievance, and the patience of a man who had been waiting most of his adult life. Douglas Hale had not finished. She believed that. She believed him on that one honest thing he had said, because she knew him well enough to know the difference between his performances and the rare moments when something true came through. But she and Caleb had walked into that room tonight, and they had told the truth, and the truth had done what truth did when it was given space to breathe. It had been enough. For tonight, it had been enough. She unsaddled her horse, carried the saddle to the rail, and walked toward the house. Behind her, she heard Caleb check on Pete and the heifer. She heard him ask in that same low, careful voice she had heard that very first day in the barn, "How's she doing?" And Pete's voice gruff and reliable. "Close now. Another hour, maybe 2. "I'll stay," Caleb said. "You don't have to." "I'll stay," he said again, quietly, finally. Clara stood just inside the door and listened to that, and felt something move in her chest that had no clean name, something that was not quite pride and not quite love, but was probably the particular thing that happened when the two of them got close enough to the same thing that you couldn't tell them apart anymore. She put the kettle on. She was going to be awake for a while. She might as well have something warm to bring out to the barn. The heifer delivered a healthy calf at 2:17 in the morning. Clara was there when it happened. She had carried 2 mugs of coffee out to the barn at midnight, handed one to Pete without a word, and settled onto a hay bale in the corner to wait. Caleb had looked at her when she came in. Just looked with that expression she had learned to read, the one that meant he was noting something without knowing quite how to respond to it, and she had handed him the second mug and sat down like it was entirely natural, because it was. When the calf finally came, Pete made a sound that was almost a laugh. Caleb stayed on one knee beside the heifer, one hand on her flank, talking low. The calf was small and wet and determined, and it had its legs under it within 20 minutes, which Caleb said was a good sign, and Pete confirmed was a very good sign. And Clara simply watched the whole thing with a feeling she couldn't name, something between wonder and a very quiet joy. On the walk back to the house just before 4 in the morning, Caleb said, "You didn't have to stay." "I know," she said, "but you stayed." "Caleb," she said patiently, "I am going to keep doing things I don't have to do. You're going to have to get used to it." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm working on it," he said. She almost laughed, but the warmth of that night, the coffee and the new calf and the easy quiet between them, lasted exactly 4 more days before Franklin Holt made his move. It came through a lawyer, a letter delivered to Stone Ranch by a man named Beaumont, who rode out from Red Creek and handed it to Caleb at the gate with the careful neutrality of a person who wanted it understood that he was only the messenger. Caleb read it on the porch. Clara stood beside him and read it with him, which he had stopped trying to prevent, because she had made it clear in 6 different ways over 3 months that she was going to read everything relevant to this ranch, whether he handed it to her or not. The letter was from Franklin Holt's attorney in Casper. It alleged that the 1861 sale of the eastern parcels, the sale that had transferred the Holt land to Caleb's father, had been conducted under duress, with evidence of financial coercion, and that the Holt family intended to file a formal petition to the territorial court to have the sale examined for fraud. It also alleged that Caleb Stone had been aware of this disputed title since inheriting the property and had deliberately concealed it from subsequent transactions. Clara read that second part twice. "Is there any truth to the concealment claim?" she said. "No," Caleb said. "I disclosed the Holt dispute in every transaction I've entered since I inherited the ranch. It's in every contract. It's why 2 of the lease agreements have a specific clause about title indemnity." He looked at her. "I have never hidden it. I have disclosed it more than I was legally required to." "Good," she said. "We're going to need those documents." "I know where they are." "All of them." "Everyone," he said. "I've kept everything. Every letter, every filing, every response. 14 years of it." She looked at him. "You knew this was coming," she said. "Eventually." "I knew it was always possible," he said. "Franklin's father threatened it twice and never followed through. I thought Franklin might be the same." He paused. "I was wrong." "Who's the best lawyer in Casper?" she said. He blinked. Just slightly, the small recalibration of a man who had planned to handle this the way he handled most things, which was alone and without help. "There's a man named Aldrich. He handled the last lease dispute on the Northern Range. He's thorough." "Write to him today," she said. "Not tomorrow. Today." "Clara." "Today," she said. "Because Franklin Holt did not file this in December by accident. He filed it in December because winter slows things down, and he wants us to spend 3 months anxious while the roads are bad and communications are slow." She held his gaze. "We don't give him that. We respond immediately, completely, and we don't let him set the pace." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. "You've dealt with someone who does this before," he said. "Yes," she said. "Hale." "Yes." He nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "Today." They wrote the letter together at the kitchen table, Clara drafting, and Caleb correcting any detail that required his specific knowledge of the land and the transactions. It took 2 hours. When it was done, it was precise and complete, and left no room for ambiguity, and it went out on the afternoon rider to Casper with a request for an urgent response. That night after supper, Pete knocked on the kitchen door. He came in hat in hand and stood in the middle of the kitchen with the expression of a man who had something to say and was not entirely sure how to say it. "I heard about the Holt filing," he said. Caleb looked at him. "Word travels. In this town it travels before it's finished being true," Pete said. He turned the hat in his hands. "I want you to know I've worked this ranch 11 years. I know every inch of this land. And if you need someone to talk to that court about what this operation is and how it's been run, I'll do it." Caleb was still. "Pete, I'm not finished," Pete said, with the slightly belligerent certainty of a man who has prepared a speech and intends to deliver all of it. "I also want to say—" He glanced at Clara briefly, then back. "I want to say that I was wrong about how I treated Mrs. Stone when she first arrived. I was wrong, and I knew it, and I didn't say so, and that's not the kind of man I want to be." The kitchen was very quiet. Clara said, "Pete, I appreciate that." He nodded. Not comfortably. Pete was not built for comfort in emotional moments, but genuinely. "She's good for this ranch," he said to Caleb, as though Clara might not hear him from 4 feet away. "Better than good." "I know," Caleb said. "Right," Pete said. He put his hat back on. "Just so it's said." He left. Clara looked at Caleb. "Did your ranch hand just vouch for me to my own husband?" she said. "Yes," Caleb said. "In this kitchen." "In this kitchen." She shook her head slowly, but she was smiling, and she didn't try very hard to hide it. The lawyer's response came in 6 days, which was faster than Clara had expected, and slower than she would have liked. Aldrich confirmed that the Holt claim had been filed formally with the territorial court, that it would be assigned to a judge in the spring session, and that the case, while not without merit on procedural grounds, was unlikely to succeed, given the documentation Caleb had provided. Unlikely to succeed was not the same as will not succeed, And Clara filed that distinction carefully in the part of her mind that didn't let things go until they were resolved. But it was enough to breathe on for now. What she had not expected what arrived completely without warning. In the second week of December was Douglas Hale. Not a letter this time. Not a strategy conducted through dinners with the mayor. Douglas himself standing at her bread table at the Tuesday market, looking like a man who had not slept well in some time. She saw him coming. She had made a habit of knowing who was approaching her bread table before they arrived, a skill that Red Creek had efficiently developed in her over the last months. She finished wrapping a loaf for Mrs. Tanner, accepted the coins, smiled, and then turned to face him. "Douglas," she said. "I need to talk to you," he said. Not like before. I need to actually talk to you." She looked at him. Something was different. The smoothness was not entirely gone, but it was thinner than usual, worn down to something that might have been the actual person underneath it. "I have a customer in 3 minutes," she said. "After the market," he said. "Somewhere private, please." She thought about it. She said, "The diner, noon. And Caleb comes with me." He hesitated. "All right," he said. He came to the diner at noon. He was already there when they arrived, seated at the corner table that Clara had specifically chosen when she told him the diner, because it was visible from the street and had 2 exits, and she was not entirely without caution, regardless of how tired and different he looked. Caleb sat beside her. He ordered coffee and said nothing, which Clara had come to understand was one of his genuine skills. The ability to be entirely present without filling the space which allowed other people to fill it themselves, often with more than they had intended to say. Douglas wrapped his hands around his own coffee cup and looked at them both. "I made a mistake coming here," he said. "Not just I mean the way I came here. What I was trying to do." He stopped, started again. "The Holt filing. I helped with that." Clara went very still. Beside her she felt Caleb become not tense exactly, but more present, more focused. "You helped Franklin Holt file the petition," she said. "I connected him with the attorney in Casper," Douglas said. I told him that if the filing moved quickly before word got back to you, it would be harder to counter." He looked at the table. "I thought I told myself it was legitimate, that the Holt family had a real grievance, and I was just helping them pursue it." "But," Clara said. "But I did it because of you," he said quietly. "Because I wanted something to go wrong here. I wanted you to come to me and tell me you'd made a mistake." He looked up. "That's the truth. And I know it's not a good truth." The diner was busy around them, the normal noise of a dozen Tuesday lunches, and in the middle of all that ordinary sound. This man was saying something she had not expected, which was something honest. "What changed?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I've been watching," he said. "Since I got here, watching how this town works and how people talk about you and about your husband." He paused. "The things people say about him, Clara, when he's not around, when they think no one is listening." His jaw tightened slightly. "I found out about the Coulter barn, the feed he sent after the fire. I found out about the Meredith family's children, the ones who needed medicine last winter. Did you know about that?" She glanced at Caleb. He was looking at the table. "No," she said. "Which one?" "The youngest had fever in February," Douglas said. "The family couldn't afford the doctor. The doctor came anyway, paid in full anonymously by your husband." He looked at Caleb directly for the first time since they'd sat down. "I asked the doctor myself. He told me." The table was quiet. "Douglas," Caleb said. It was the first thing he'd said since they sat down. His voice was even. "Why are you telling us this?" Douglas looked at him. "Because I helped Holt file that petition, and it was wrong," he said. "And because I can undo part of what I did." He reached into his coat and put an envelope on the table. "That's a letter from me to the Casper attorney, withdrawing my involvement and correcting 2 pieces of information in the original filing that were inaccurate. Things I told him that I exaggerated." He pushed the envelope toward Caleb. "It won't end the case. Holt can still pursue it, but it removes the strongest pieces of the argument." Clara looked at the envelope. She looked at Douglas. "Why?" she said again. Not because she didn't believe him, but because she needed to hear the full answer. He was quiet for a long moment. "Because I was angry," he said. "For 2 years I told myself the story of what happened between us in a way where I was the wronged party, where you were the one who couldn't appreciate what you had." He looked at her. "And then I came here and watched you and watched him, and I finally understand what you saw that I couldn't give you." He folded his hands. "I'm not a bad person. I've made bad choices. Those are not the same thing, but they're close enough that I needed to do something to put some distance between them." Clara picked up the envelope. She looked at the handwriting. Then she put it down and slid it to Caleb. "Caleb," she said quietly, "it's your ranch." He looked at the envelope, picked it up, opened it carefully, read it. He folded it back, put it in his own coat pocket. He looked at Douglas. "Thank you," he said, simply, plainly, without performance. Douglas nodded. He stood. He pulled on his coat. "I'm leaving Red Creek tomorrow," he said. "I don't have any reason to stay." He looked at Clara one more time. "I'm glad you're all right. I mean that without any other agenda attached to it." She believed him. "Take care of Douglas," she said. He left. She and Caleb sat in the corner booth for a moment after he was gone. The diner moved around them, indifferent and busy. "That was not what I expected," she said. "No," Caleb said. "Are you all right?" He looked at the window. "I'm thinking," he said. "About what?" "About the fact that the man who came here to take something apart just handed me the thing most likely to hold it together." He paused. "That's a strange thing to sit with." She looked at him. "Is it?" "Yes. I don't know," she said. "I think people surprise you when you give them enough space to be something other than what you expect." She paused. "You gave me that space. First day. Kitchen table. You gave me room to be something other than what the rumors said I was." She looked at him steadily. Maybe Douglas just needed someone to stop expecting the worst of him long enough that he could stop being it. Caleb was quiet for a moment. "That's a generous way to think about someone who tried to take your husband's ranch," he said. "I'm a generous person," she said. "I married you, didn't I?" He looked at her. And for the second time, only the second time in the months she had known him, he smiled. Not the small, careful testing thing she had seen in the kitchen. A real one. Brief and a little surprised and entirely unguarded. She stored it in the same place she had stored the first one. She was building a collection. The letter from Aldrich arrived 10 days before Christmas, and it was better than either of them had hoped. With Douglas Holt's withdrawn statement and the corrected information, the petition had been materially weakened. The assigned judge had sent a preliminary note indicating he saw insufficient grounds for a full fraud review and was inclined to rule on the existing title documentation, which was, as Caleb had said, complete and entirely clear. It was not a final resolution. That would come in spring. But it was, Aldrich wrote, as strong a preliminary position as he had seen in a disputed title case in 15 years of practice. Clara read the letter twice, and then put it very carefully in the box where they kept the important documents, the one she had organized in October, and that Caleb had initially protested and then never mentioned again because it meant he could find anything in 30 seconds. "We should tell Pete," she said. "I already did," Caleb said. "What did he say?" "He said, and I'm quoting exactly, about time that court looked at an actual document instead of listening to whatever a man with a grievance and a lawyer can afford to say." "Pete," Clara said with a fondness that had surprised her by how quickly it had developed, "is a very practical philosopher." "He is," Caleb agreed. Christmas at Stone Ranch was quiet by the standards of the holiday, and loud by the standards of Caleb Stone's previous 41 Christmases, which had apparently been conducted in complete solitude with a bottle of decent whiskey and no decorations whatsoever. Clara did not ask permission. She simply appeared one morning with pine boughs and 3 candles and a length of red ribbon that she had purchased at Henderson's, and by the end of the day, the house looked like a place where someone intended to celebrate something, and Caleb moved through it with the expression of a man experiencing something for which he had no existing frame of reference. "Is this all right?" she asked, because she had promised honesty in both directions, and that included checking. He looked around the kitchen. at the pine boughs over the window and the candles on the table and the red ribbon on the door. "Yes," he said. "It's yes. You can tell me if it's too much." "It's not too much," he said. He looked at her. "I don't have a point of comparison. I've never had this." "Never. My mother died when I was 19, he said. "Before that, we didn't have the money for much. After that, there was just me." He paused. "So no, I don't have a comparison." He looked at the candles. "But I think this is what it's supposed to feel like." She had to look away for a moment. They had Pete and his wife and their 3 children for Christmas dinner, which Clara cooked from 5 in the morning, and the small ranch house was full of noise and pine smell, and the particular chaos of children who had been fed too much and were running out of polite behavior at approximately the same rate they were running out of daylight. Pete's youngest, a boy of about 6 named Samuel, spent 45 minutes climbing on Caleb's knee with the confidence of a child who had not yet received the information that Caleb's stone was supposed to be frightening. Caleb let him. He sat at the head of the table with this small boy scaling him like a very enthusiastic mountain, and talked to Pete about the spring lease situation with complete equanimity. Pete's wife, whose name was Ruth, and who had the same practical directness as her husband, but deployed it with considerably more warmth, leaned over to Clara at the kitchen counter and said quietly, "He's good with children." "He's patient," Clara said. "With most things. With people who haven't been told to be afraid of him." Ruth looked at her. "You've been good for him," she said. "I've known Caleb Stone for 11 years. That man at that table is not the same man who was at that table a year ago." Clara looked at Caleb, at the child on his knee, at the expression on his face, not performing happiness, just having it quietly in the way he did everything. "He's been good for me too," she said. "It goes both ways." Ruth nodded like that was exactly the right answer. On Christmas night, after the Halfords had gone home, and the dishes were done, and the house was quiet, Clara and Caleb sat at the kitchen table. The candles were still lit. The pine smell was settling into something softer. "I needed to tell you something," Caleb said. She looked at him. "I had a plan," he said. "When you first agreed to the marriage, I had decided I was going to give it a year, see how it went. And at the end of the year, if you wanted to leave, I was going to help you leave, set you up somewhere, give you enough to start over properly." He looked at the candles. "Because I couldn't imagine that someone would actually choose this, choose me, without eventually deciding they'd made a mistake." Clara said nothing. "I've been waiting," he said quietly. "For the moment you realize you'd be better off with someone else. Someone who doesn't come with land disputes and 30-year grudges and a town full of people who've spent 2 decades being wrong about him." He paused. "I've been waiting for that and trying not to show you that I was waiting for it." She looked at him for a long moment. "Caleb," she said, "look at me." He looked at her. "I know you've been waiting for that," she said. "I've seen it. 3 months of watching you, and I've seen it every time I stayed when you expected me to go. Every time I came back when you thought I might not." She held his gaze. "I'm not leaving. Not in a year. Not because the land dispute resolves, or because the town learns to see you properly, or because everything gets easier." She paused. "I'm staying because I choose to. Every morning. That's how it works." His jaw tightened just slightly, just enough that she could see what it was costing him to receive that, to let it be real. "How do you know?" he said, quietly, genuinely, not challenging, but asking the real question, the one underneath all the others. "Because I stopped keeping an exit," she said. "The day I stopped planning what I'd do if this didn't work, I knew. That was the day I knew." She reached across the table and put her hand over his, briefly, the same way he had done it that first night with the Cheyenne letter, and then left it there. "You can stop waiting, Caleb. I'm already home." He looked at her hand over his. He turned his hand over and held hers. I didn't say anything. He didn't need to. She could feel it in the way he held on, not hard, not desperate, but steady. The grip of a man who had finally put down the thing he'd been bracing against for years and found that the ground beneath him held. Outside, the December dark was absolute and cold and enormous. Inside, the candles burned down slow, and the pine smell was in everything, and the wind moved across the territory like it always had and always would, indifferent and ancient and vast. In the spring, the court would rule. Franklin Holt would accept it, or he wouldn't. The town would continue its slow adjustment to a version of Caleb Stone that didn't quite match the one it had invented. Pete would be gruff and loyal, and occasionally accidentally philosophical. The cattle would calve. The fences would need tending. The accounts would need managing. All the ordinary weight of a real life would keep arriving the way it did without ceremony or pause. But right now, it was Christmas night, and the house was warm, and the man across the table was holding her hand like she was something he had stopped being afraid to keep. That was enough. That was, in fact, everything. The court ruling came on a Tuesday in March, which was, as far as Clara was concerned, the least dramatic possible day for something they had been waiting 4 months to hear. Aldrich sent word by telegraph. 3 lines. Caleb read it standing at the kitchen counter, still in his work coat, mud on his boots, because the rider had come while he was out checking the eastern fence, and Clara had sent Pete to fetch him, and he had come straight in without stopping. He read it once. Then he set it on the counter and looked at it. "Well," Clara said. "Title upheld," he said. "In full. Holt's petition dismissed." He paused. The judge noted that the original sale documentation was among the most thoroughly maintained records he had reviewed in a territorial dispute, and that there was no credible evidence of coercion. Clara let out a breath she had been holding since December. "Most thoroughly maintained records," she said. "Yes." 14 years of keeping everything, she said. "Yes." She crossed the kitchen and picked up the telegram and read it herself, because she was not the kind of woman who accepted second-hand reports on things that mattered. She read it twice, put it down, and looked at him. "How do you feel?" she said. He thought about it. "Like a man who just put down something very heavy," he said, "and is still getting used to his own hands being empty." She nodded. "That sounds right." Pete knocked on the kitchen door 5 minutes later, came in without waiting for an answer, in the way he had recently begun doing, which Clara had decided to take as a sign of comfort rather than rudeness, and looked at both of them with the expression of a man who had already guessed the answer but needed to hear it said. "Well," he said. "We won," Caleb said. Pete put his hat on the counter, sat down at the kitchen table without being invited, and said, "Someone put the kettle on." Clara put the kettle on. They sat for an hour. The 3 of them in the kitchen, that had become the center of everything, the kitchen where Clara had written her notes, and Caleb had read by lamplight, and Pete had delivered his speech about being wrong, and they talked about the spring lease renewal, which now moved forward without complication, and the calving season that was already underway, and the section of the north pasture that needed reseeding, and all the ordinary urgent things that a working ranch needed talked about. Franklin Holt's name came up once. Pete said he had heard that Holt had gone back to Casper and was unlikely to return, and that the 30-year grievance had apparently not survived contact with a judge who had read all the documents. Clara said nothing. Caleb said nothing. They moved on. That was how they put it behind them. Not with a ceremony or a speech. Just by moving on to the next thing, the way people did when they were more interested in what was ahead than in what was finished. But Red Creek was not finished with them yet. Not quite. The shift happened gradually, the way most real shifts did, not in a single dramatic moment, but in the accumulation of small ones, each individually unremarkable together, constituting something undeniable. It started with Walt Greer, the neighboring rancher, whose cattle had strayed through the downed fence in November. He came by the ranch in early March officially to discuss the spring water rights on the shared Eastern Creek, and he stayed for 2 hours and left having accepted a cup of coffee and told Caleb 3 times that the fence repair they'd done together in December had held through the worst of the winter better than anything his own men had built. That was one. Then Jim Aldis, the mayor, stopped Clara on Main Street in the second week of March and said, with the specific discomfort of a man who had made a calculation that arrived somewhere he hadn't intended, that he hoped there were no hard feelings about the November meeting. Clara looked at him with the pleasantest expression she owned and said that she held no hard feelings and that she hoped the spring lease renewals would go smoothly for everyone involved, and walked on before he could respond. That was 2. The third was more surprising. Margaret Hale, whose nephew had ridden out of Red Creek in December, and whose relationship with Clara had consisted entirely of one blocked doorway in a church, appeared at Clara's bread table on a Thursday market morning and purchased 2 loaves of bread without making eye contact, and then just before she walked away, said very quickly and very quietly, "I heard about the court ruling. I'm glad it came out right." She was gone before Clara could respond. Clara stood at her table for a moment. She said to no one in particular. She sold 3 more loaves in the next 20 minutes, and each customer who came to her table was a little warmer than they had been the previous month and the month before that. Not transformed, not suddenly best friends. But the particular coolness that had been standard, the slight distance, the careful neutrality had thawed by a few degrees that mattered. She told Caleb about it that evening. "Margaret Hale," he said. 2 loaves, white and rye." "That's something," he said. "It is," she said. "It's a small something." "Small somethings add up," he said. She looked at him. "When did you become an optimist?" He considered. "I'm not sure I'm an optimist," he said. "I think I'm just less braced for the worst than I used to be." She held that for a moment. "That's better than optimism," she said. "Optimism is easy. Being less afraid after everything you've been through, that takes work." He looked at her in the way he did sometimes, that open, unguarded look she had been collecting since Christmas, and said nothing, which was how she knew he agreed. The spring came hard and fast, the way it did in Wyoming. All mud and sudden warmth and everything needing doing at once after months of frozen waiting. The calving season hit its peak in April, which meant Clara and Pete and all 4 of the seasonal hands were working from before dawn until after dark, and Caleb was everywhere at once. In the way she had come to understand was simply how he operated during the heavy seasons. Not superhuman, just relentlessly consistent, showing up wherever he was most needed, without needing to be asked. She found her rhythm in it. That surprised her still, not that she had found it, but that it felt so completely like her own. The bread was still going to the Tuesday and Thursday markets, because she had decided months ago that it mattered to keep that thread into town, and Pete's wife Ruth had joined her twice, which had turned into a quiet, regular partnership that neither of them had formally agreed to, but both of them showed up for. On an afternoon in late April, she was coming back from the east pasture, having gone out to check the water situation on the creek that ran along the formerly disputed boundary, when she came over the rise and saw something that stopped her. Caleb was standing at the gate, which was not unusual. But standing with him was a boy she recognized, maybe 12 years old, belonging to a family named Jarvis, who had a small operation 3 miles south, and who had, she knew, been struggling badly since the father's injury last fall. The boy was holding the reins of a horse that was limping on its left foreleg, and even from this distance, she could see the way he was holding himself, the stiff, controlled posture of a child, trying very hard not to cry in front of an adult. Caleb crouched down to the horse's level. He was talking. She could not hear the words from this distance, but she could see the boy's posture change, the shoulders dropping slightly, the terrible controlled stiffness easing just a fraction. Caleb examined the foreleg. He stood, said something. The boy nodded. Caleb took the reins, led the horse toward the barn, and gestured for the boy to follow. He didn't look up. He had no idea she was watching. She sat on her horse on the rise for a moment. She thought about the flour in the mud, the bill placed on top of the ruined bag. "I know you don't need it. I'm offering it." She thought about the boy in the cattle pen. "You're all right. You're okay. Go find your daddy." She thought about 11 anonymous donations in 3 years, entered in careful handwriting under community expense with no names attached. She thought about a notice on a church board, written in plain straight words, with no flourish. "I offer respect, a real home, and a man who will never give up on what matters." She had read that notice, and thought this might be the most honest advertisement she had ever seen. She had been right, but not in the way she'd imagined. She had thought she was reading a practical offer from a practical man. What she had actually been reading was a man's entire character compressed into 6 sentences, offered without decoration to anyone willing to look at it directly. She turned her horse toward the barn. The boy, his name was Thomas Jarvis, stayed for an hour. Caleb treated the horse's leg, showed Thomas what to watch for over the next week, and sent him home with 2 wrapped packages of food that Clara assembled in the kitchen without asking for any explanation because none was needed. She had been feeding people who came to this ranch since November, and she had learned that the question was never why, but always what do they need. Thomas Jarvis shook Caleb's hand at the gate with the seriousness of a 12-year-old trying very hard to conduct himself like a man. Caleb shook it back with equal seriousness. When the boy was gone, Caleb came back into the kitchen and stopped when he saw Clara leaning against the counter with her arms folded and the particular expression she wore when she had witnessed something and intended to speak about it. "I saw," she said simply. "The horse was—" "Caleb," she said. He stopped. "I know," she said. "I'm not going to make a speech about it. I just want you to know I saw." He looked at her for a moment. "All right," he said quietly. "Also," she said, "I'm writing it down." He blinked. "Writing what down?" "All of it," she said. "Every time. I've been keeping a record, in a notebook. Every person, every family, every horse, every anonymous donation I can trace." She met his gaze. "Because someday, maybe soon, maybe years from now, someone else in this town is going to stand up and say something untrue about you. And when they do, I am going to have a book full of what is actually true." She paused. "You spent 14 years building something with no one watching. I'm watching now, and I'm keeping track." His expression did the thing. It did the slow, unguarded opening that he still couldn't entirely control, the one that appeared whenever she did something he hadn't known how to expect. "Clara," he said. "Don't argue with me," she said. "I wasn't going to argue," he said. "I was going to say thank you." She unfolded her arms. "Oh," she said. "Well then." May brought the lease renewals, which went through cleanly and completely, with the northern range secured for another 3 years at favorable terms. Aldrich sent a final letter confirming that the Holt matter was fully closed, and that the title was now if anything more definitively clear than it had been before Franklin Holt had attempted to challenge it. Caleb read the letter, filed it in the organized document box, and went back outside to check on the second calving of the day. Clara watched him go, and thought, that is a man who does not know how to celebrate, which is something we are going to work on. She made a pie. She had made pie before she was a baker. Pie was not remarkable, but this one was specific. She made it from the dried apples they had put up in October, the ones she had spent an afternoon in the fall kitchen processing with Ruth Halford, while their husbands argued about fence line angles 30 feet away. She made it because the lease was secure, and the title was clear, and the winter was finished, and the calves were healthy, and Douglas Hale was in another city entirely, and Franklin Holt had run out of a 30-year grievance, and there was a boy named Thomas Jarvis, whose horse was going to be all right. She made it because some things deserved to be marked even quietly. When Caleb came in at dusk and saw it on the table, he stopped. "What's the occasion?" he said. "We won," she said. He looked at the pie. "We found that out in March." "I was busy in March," she said. "Sit down, Caleb." He sat down. She cut 2 slices. She put one in front of him. She sat down across from him. He picked up his fork, looked at the pie, then looked at her. "You've been doing this all year," he said. "Marking things. The new calf. Christmas. The letter from Aldrich." He paused. "You do it quietly so it doesn't feel like a ceremony. But you always mark it." She looked at him. "Someone should." "Why?" "Because you've spent 14 years not marking anything," she said. "Not celebrating anything. Not letting yourself have it. Whatever you built, whatever went right, you just moved to the next thing." She set her fork down. "That's done now. We mark things, both of us." He was quiet. "That's not a negotiation," she added. "I know," he said. "I'm not negotiating." He looked at her. "I'm trying to absorb it. The idea that things can go right and I'm allowed to sit with that, without waiting for it to go wrong again." She looked at him steadily. "Are you getting there?" He picked up his fork. "Slowly," he said. "That's fine," she said. "I'm patient." He took a bite of the pie. A pause. "This is very good," he said. "I know," she said. They ate in the easy quiet that had become the sound of their kitchen, not the silence of loneliness or the silence of people with nothing to say, but the silence of two people who had said the hard things and could now let the ordinary moments be ordinary. It was Ruth Halford who told Clara that summer what people in Red Creek were saying about Caleb Stone. They were at the Tuesday market, the two of them side by side at the bread table, when Ruth said, "You know what Jim Tanner said at the feed store last week? He said Caleb Stone is the most reliable man in the territory. Said it like it was a fact everybody already knew." Clara looked at her. "Jim Tanner," she said. "Who 3 years ago wouldn't let his wife buy bread from your table because you were associated with the Stone name," Ruth said. "Yes, that Jim Tanner." Clara thought about that. "People change," she said. "Some of them," Ruth said, "when they're shown something real for long enough that they can't pretend they haven't seen it." She straightened a loaf. "That's what you did, you know. Both of you. You just kept being real, right where everyone could see." Clara sold bread for the rest of the morning without saying much, because Ruth had given her something to think about, and she preferred to think without talking when she could. On the ride home, she turned it over. Kept being real, right where everyone could see. That was it. That was the whole strategy. The one she and Caleb had never formally named, but had been executing since the morning she walked into a barn and found a giant cowboy speaking softly to a frightened horse. The strategy was not to fight the rumors, or outlast them, or defeat them. The strategy was simply to be consistently, and without apology, the thing that the rumors said wasn't there. And here was the thing about that strategy. It was slow, and it was unglamorous, and it required showing up the same way on the bad days as on the good days. And it did not produce a single dramatic moment of vindication that could be pointed to and said there, that was when everything changed. Instead, it produced a Tuesday at the feed store, when Jim Tanner said something true about Caleb Stone without realizing it was remarkable. It produced Margaret Hale buying 2 loaves of bread and saying something quiet before walking away. It produced Walt Greer coming to talk water rights and staying 2 hours. It produced Thomas Jarvis at the gate with a limping horse, knowing because someone had told him, and that someone had been told by someone else, that Stone Ranch was a place where you could go when you needed help, and you wouldn't be turned away. It produced a town that was still imperfect, still capable of rumor and small cruelty, and the comfortable laziness of believing what it had always believed. But a town that was changing, slowly, one true thing at a time. Clara came home to find Caleb sitting on the porch, which he rarely did in the working hours. He was always moving, always doing, and she slowed her horse and looked at him. "Everything all right?" she called. "Thomas Jarvis's father came by," he said, "to pay for the horse treatment." She dismounted. "And I told him there was no charge." He paused. "He shook my hand," said. He stopped. She tied her horse and came to the porch. "What did he say?" Caleb looked at his hands. "He said his boy came home from here different," he said quietly. "Said Thomas had been afraid to ask anyone for help because he'd been told that asking for help was weak, and coming here changed something in the boy's mind about that." He paused. He said whatever they say about you in town, you're the kind of man I want my son to know." Clara stood very still. Caleb looked up at her. His eyes were clear and steady, but she could see what it had cost him, what it was still costing him to hold that sentence. The sentence that no one had said to him before. The sentence he had stopped expecting anyone would ever say. She sat down beside him on the porch. She did not speak. She put her hand over his, the same way he had done for her that first night with the Cheyenne letter, and she left it there. After a moment, he turned his hand over and held hers. They sat like that for a while in the late afternoon light, while the ranch moved around them, the sounds of cattle and horses, and the distant voices of the hands finishing the day's last work, and the territory spread out enormous and indifferent beyond the fence line. A year ago, this man had been a rumor. The giant cowboy everyone feared. The man no woman would willingly stand beside. A year ago, she had been a woman running from a version of herself that someone else had written. And now they were here sitting on a porch they had both chosen, in a life they had built, one honest day at a time. And the man beside her was not a legend or a monster or a cautionary tale. He was Caleb Stone, who read by lamplight and spoke softly to frightened horses, and kept 11 years of receipts for kindnesses he had given without his name attached. He was the best person she had ever known, and she had almost let a town full of rumors stop her from finding that out. She thought about the woman she had been when she stood in front of that church board in the cold reading a plain notice written in a plain hand, listing herself 1,000 reasons to say no. She thought about what had made her pick up a pencil and draw a line through someone else's cruelty. What had made her sit down and write that single letter? What had made her ride through that gate? She thought it was practicality at the time. She thought it was necessity. She thought it was running out of options. But sitting on this porch holding this hand, she knew it was something else. It was the same thing that had made her flinch in that first moment, and then not flinch. The same thing that had made her watch a man speak softly to a horse and stay longer than she meant to. It was the refusal to accept the story she'd been handed. It was the insistence on looking until she found what was actually there. And what was actually there had been worth every hard mile of finding. Years later, people in Red Creek told the story of Caleb Stone, the way they told all good stories, embellished at the edges, true at the center. They told it to newcomers and to each other's children, and on the long winter evenings when there was time for stories worth telling. They told it about the woman who rode alone to the giant cowboy's ranch when everyone told her not to, about the man who turned out to be everything the rumors said he wasn't. About the winter the Holt case tried to take the ranch and failed. About the Tuesday market and the bread table, and the way the two of them together had simply refused to be anything other than what they were until the town ran out of reasons to look away. They told it as a love story, which it was. They told it as a story about courage, which it was also. But the people who knew them best, Pete Halford and Ruth and Walt Greer and Thomas Jarvis, who grew up to be a straight and decent man, knew it was something simpler and more durable than either of those things. It was a story about two people who had both been misread by the world, who found each other, and who chose every morning in the ordinary and unglamorous work of a real life to keep choosing. That was the story. That was the whole of it, and it was enough.